start of term proper.
Rugby club, golfing society, tennis, squash club, flora and fauna. Philately, is that all? You're idle, man, idle.
I can't join everything. I've got to work sometime.
What about bird watching? You can take a book along with you.
How can I watch if I'm reading a book?
Follow in the footsteps of WG. Any Yorkshiremen here?
There are Stella. I can't bat for toffee.
Upon the battle scene, they fight the foe together. Where every mother's son, prepared to fight or fall, is the enemy of one, the enemy of all is the enemy of one, the enemy of all is.
Abraham, D-chair.
Can't manage tenor, can you?
Desperately short of tenors. Afraid not, except under torture. How about you, Aubrey? Sing, deal.
School choir, that's all.
You, Stella?
Not on your life. They kicked me out of Ring a Roses.
Sorry about that. Still, we can't all be gifted. If everybody's somebody, then no one's anybody. Put my friend here down as well.
Hey, steady on.
Excellent.
Splendid. Rehearsal start on Monday. I allow it.
Perhaps a boyant.
Perfect. You can be queen of the fairies.
These are the forces of gorgeous to the brink.
Where are you when your country needed you?
We have a duty, a solemn duty to those countless millions of lives. Needless.
Glad to have you, Stella. Good middle distance men, they don't grow on trees, you know.
I can't vouch for those times. Taken with the school alarm clock, most of them.
So give or take a second, they're good enough for me. You come across a fellow called Abrahams? H.M. Abrahams. He's challenged for the college dash.
What's so special about that?
It's special, my dear fellow, because in all the 700 years, nobody's ever done it. Right, what do you do?
This is Criteria.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras, and I'm here with my co-host, James Majewski. Hello, James.
Hello, Thomas.
And we're here today to discuss a beloved film from the Vatican film list under the section of Values, Chariots of Fire, 1981 British historical sports drama with a very, very famous theme song by Vangelis. So we have here with us today a friend of ours who we both met here in New York City, now out there in Chicago. And he is the director of the entertainment division of Relevant Radio, which is a new development for them called the Merry Beggars. Actor, producer, voiceover artist, etc. Peter Atkinson. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you, Thomas. It's good to be with both of you, you and James.
So, Peter, will you tell us a bit? This is a very, very new thing that you've just got off the ground over at Relevant Radio. So will you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, actually, and it's funny because right before this interview, as both of you know, I was editing or working with the sound designer on editing episode 1 of our production, our first production. So we're in the thick of launching this new venture. And by the time this comes out, there'll be a plethora of Christmas Carol episodes for your audience to listen to. So the Merry Beggars is the entertainment division of Relevant Radio. What does that mean? Well, Relevant Radio's mission is to bring Christ to the world through the media, and part of the media is, of course, talk show radio, which is, Relevant Radio's bread and butter for decades. And now they've asked the Merry Beggars to come on board, and the Merry Beggars merged with Relevant Radio earlier this year to try and complete the picture of what that media is. And the Merry Beggars is doing the entertainment part of that picture. And we're starting out with these audio shows, these radio shows. The first production that we're doing under the Relevant Radio umbrella is we are doing an audio advent calendar of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. So we took Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol and turned it into a 270-page script, adaptation, radio script that is split into 25 different episodes, and you can listen to it every day during December. Now, some people will say, well, that's not the full days of Advent, and I will say, yes, that is true. However, we want to be able to have people enjoy this every year after year. So we opted for the 25 days of December.
This is, I think, the second longest possible Advent that we are in the midst of right now, if I'm not mistaken.
We have strategies for adapting the 25 days to the 28, 27, but for now it's just the 25 episodes. So yeah, that's what the Merry Beggars is. We have a couple of employees here in Lincolnshire outside of Chicago, where we're starting to bring original entertainment to families and listeners across the U.S. So it's exciting. And part of that venture is we created a streaming service as part of this whole picture. We developed a sort of hybrid of Spotify and Netflix, where users can create their account and stream all of our shows. And the really nice thing is it's completely free forever for life. So there are no advertisements. There's nothing. And users just create their account and will be able to listen to all of our shows. So that is what I've been up to for. It's sort of the fulfillment of a 4 or 5 year vision. And through God's providence, there's a whole backstory that I won't bore you or your audience with at this point about how it came into being, but it has been remarkable and providential pretty much every step of the way. It's been awesome.
That's so awesome. I first met you, I think at the end of 2019 or beginning of 2020. So it's only been about 2 years that I've known you, but it's been awesome to kind of track the progress of so many of these projects as they've been bearing fruit and growing. And it's really exciting. In fact, we're talking to you right now on the eve of the release of the very first episode of this Christmas Carol project. So we're kind of all buzzing in the aura of that, the anticipation.
Yeah. So
it's super exciting.
So really how can people get go and subscribe to that, Peter?
So you can go to the merrybeggars.com and sign up there. But sometimes people have trouble spelling the Merry Beggars. Note to self, when you're coming up with a company, make sure that it sounds good, especially if it's an audio company. So some people have asked if we're a pastry shop. Are you the Merry Bakers? Do you sell pastries? Other people have asked if we're like a Marian devotion. Are you the Marian Beggars? What is this? So the easiest way is just go to relevantradio.com or the Relevant Radio app. And you can click through on the Christmas Carol banner and find the Merry Beggars.
How many cast members do you have in this Christmas Carol?
And this is our biggest production yet. It was really exciting. I mean, it was honestly just a dream come true. We were casting this production with actors from Chicago, Missouri, Kentucky. We wanted to get extremely professional actors. We didn't want to get sort of people who would stumble along or be a little amateurish. We wanted to create something that really stood the test of time over the next years, decades. So we ended up with 25 sort of veteran actors. Wow. The Scrooge, Scott Lynch Giddings, he actually, and this was honestly providential, he had actually performed a one-man show of A Christmas Carol before where he had played every single part. And he ended up being our Scrooge, and so he knew the character inside and out. And our Dickens was fantastic, and we lucked out with so many fantastic actors, and we brought them all into one room. We built out a custom studio here, which is a euphemism for hanging lots of blankets and putting mics through the room.
I've built many a custom studio.
Oh yeah, it was great. And we ended up having 25 actors. We had about 18 in a room, I think, at one point, recording in a circle, all being able to perform off of each other, and so on and so forth. So it was just really, really exciting. And I think what the audience will get from that is the actors, when they're performing against each other, are not, edited together from different Zoom sessions. They're not, calling each other over Skype. Like, they're actually able to look the other actors in the eye and play the scene with them, do 2 or 3 takes, find the right characters in relationship to each other. So it was pretty awesome.
Yeah, well,
and
that really is providential, because I mean, I know you'd been experimenting with different forms of podcast theater that began during the lockdowns, And so you were recording things remotely, and from what I
Yep.
understand, we haven't talked about it very much, but from what I understand, you just found that was very difficult, and so that you could actually get a gig at a Catholic radio station making the sorts of productions you wanted to make with a bunch of professional actors in the same room is pretty astounding.
Yeah, it was exceptional, and so two things to say to that. One is we were able to create the quality that we wanted by recording actors over Zoom. We were able to do that. And one of the advantages of that is that you literally have a worldwide casting network, right? Like you can work with someone, and we have worked with someone in England, and then in Maine, and then in Ohio, and so on and so forth. The downside of that is it takes forever to edit them together. Oh my gosh. It took from beginning to end, it would take somewhere between 9 and 10 weeks to produce one of the quarantine plays. It just took forever. And so now it's still taking a while to produce this Christmas Carol. And we have a bigger team now. We have 2 sound designers working on it, but we're able to produce essentially 25 of the quarantine plays, the sort of 10, 13-minute episodes, at a much higher quality with, 6 times the amount of actors. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the approach we took was the script needs to be in alignment with the Catholic worldview, right? We're a Catholic production company. We're a Catholic entertainment company. We want the script to be something that we can feel proud of and feel like we are serving Christ through producing this particular script. As far as the actors go, we will take anyone who is not, anti-Catholic, who is not, trying to tear down the church or the mission, or once they discover that we're a Catholic entertainment company, they'll suddenly start posting lots of things on Instagram to not be a fan of us or whatever. Because we want to get the best possible actors for these productions. And James, I'm sure you know, as an actor in New York City, that you just come to the projects, and as long as they're not in violation of your own conscience, you'll hop on board and be a part of the project. And that was sort of the approach we took to actors, is we wanted to bring in the best, and some of them were, we think, Catholic, some of them weren't. And one of the things that we tried to do with all of the actors when they came into the room was treat them with the greatest amount of respect and dignity that we possibly could, so that if they weren't Catholic, or if they had, feelings against the Catholic Church, they would walk away feeling that they had encountered something beautiful and good and true. And one of the things that we heard from actors after all the recording sessions was just sort of an excitement about what is our next project going to be? Can they work with us again? And so on and so forth. And part of that may have been the fact we paid them okay, pretty well. Part of them, it may have been the catering. But also part of it was that we wanted to be Catholic in the deepest sense of the term, which is, bringing the Catholic worldview about human dignity and about art and about craft to every aspect of the production.
Well, I think that's a good segue into this film that we're talking about today, because that's one of the themes that's present in this, right? Is this notion of doing things to honor God, for the glory of God. I think it's said at one point that you could peel a potato and do it to honor God if you did it just really well.
Right.
And obviously, what you're doing is no peeling of a potato, but. I think it's one of the reasons why I was so excited to talk to you in particular about this film. Again, we're talking about Chariots of Fire. Bum, 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 bum.
Yes. Which was the reason you weren't excited to watch the movie.
Yes.
so that's all you knew
to be
about
perfectly honest, I've never seen this movie before.
I haven't either.
And frankly, I'm glad that you get to that part in the movie right away. The guy's running on the beach, and the music and the synth.
Yeah.
And it's just too bad that it's become such a sort of a hackneyed occurrence in pop culture, because I was totally sort of desensitized to this moment. It wasn't able to have the kind of grandeur for me on my first viewing. But I'm glad that it happened so early and just kind of got out of the way, so that then I could just sort of settle back into the film and not be waiting for that moment.
So, Peter, we asked you, what do you want to discuss from the Vatican film list? And you suggested this. Did you suggest this movie because everybody in the movie looks like you?
You mean tall, skinny, and English?
Really, like, they do look so much like you. It's hilarious. They're just like these rosy-cheeked young British boys.
That's so funny. Oh my gosh. No, that was the furthest thing, the furthest thing from my mind. No, though one of the reasons that, I like the film is that it harkens back to an era where there is this sort of English striving for virtue, especially in education. And there's this philosophy of education, which I think is just one of the most beautiful things in the world. Now, there are obviously class issues that come up in the film and racial issues that come up in the film with the Harold Abrams character and played by Ben Cross and so on and so forth. But no, that is not why I chose this film. I chose this film because a lot of the films I suggested had already been taken by reviewers, and so I was trying to think, okay, what's left on this list? And the way that this film actually came across my radar was by a professor, Ave Maria, where I went to for undergrad, who you may know, Dr. Catherine Pikolik.
Yeah, I know.
And yeah, and she was advising undergrads on. She has a wonderful charism for advising young professionals, and she was advising young professionals about how to choose their vocation, their career. And she quoted this film where she said, the Eric Little character, where he says that when he runs, he feels the pleasure of God in him, and he says, God made me for a purpose, but He also made me fast. And that sort of approach to vocation and that approach to excellence in what you do just struck a deep chord inside of me. Because I think growing up Catholic, one of the viewpoints that I've had towards vocation is, vocation equals either priesthood or married or single or whatever. Right. And to have, and really in college, the idea of vocation started to deepen for me about the vocation of your work and the way that you serve people through your lay work. And I'm not an Opus Dei, but Opus Dei has a wonderful spirituality around, peeling your potatoes to excellence, right? In you encountering God in the demands of your work and you fulfilling those demands to perfection, being a way that other people can encounter God as well. And to me, that's sort of how I was raised, was just anything worth doing is worth doing well, and that everything matters, putting away the dishes matters, giving a speech matters, every aspect of life matters. And there's just something deeply beautiful about that I think Chariots of Fire captures really, really well. In a way that most films, that's a hard thing to dramatize, right? It's hard to dramatize, peeling potatoes well, but Chariots of Fire actually did it.
Sure.
Yeah,
well,
really well.
I was watching the movie and at one point my wife poked her head in and she was like, "Is this a sports movie?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "What kind of sport?" And I was like, "Running." And I could just see in her face that she, like, if she wasn't interested before, after I said it was about running, she was like completely uninterested. But the thing is that actually all of the running sequences in this film are so exciting. I got goosebumps at several moments in this movie, and for a number of reasons, not the least of which was the music. The music is actually kind of strangely perfect, even though
it's perfect except for the moments where you're like, oh, this was the 1980s.
Well, that's
like, where you have the twanging little,
it's so weird because it's got this like very dated sound that places it in a very specific moment.
Dated and anachronistic for the period.
Yes, it's anachronistic and it's like
which was deliberate, of course.
It's like tonally dissonant or discordant with like what you're seeing, especially because it's hearkening to this sort of this great age of like a Victorian kind of sensibility and propriety. But still somehow it was like strangely perfect and really contributed in some of these moments during the races to really making me feel tense. Like the anxiety before a race, in the lead up.
That's probably my favorite cue in the movie, is the weird, creepy music when they're preparing for
Yeah.
one of the final races.
Yeah.
I think that's my fave. That music works best for me of the original score.
Yeah, and it's together with a lot of other elements, the slow motion, other elements of sound design where it sort of like zooms in, so to speak, on specific noises. So like the crunch of like the gravel under their feet or something, you know, where one sound is isolated and amplified. And also during the races themselves. So in a lot of instances, these races are like 100-meter sprints that are over in a second, but the film draws them out, you know, and draws that experience out for us so that the payoff, you know, obviously when a race is won is significant, but actually the one time we see a race lost by one of these characters, by the Abrams character, it's like soul-crushingly discouraging. You really, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like you really feel the sort of the weight of losing a race in that moment. That was my favorite cue, is like this sort of the unsettling soundscape immediately after his loss.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there definitely was some bold sound design, and one of the things, just to your point about how do they make running something that you actually care about when you're watching it, is none of the races are actually about the race, right? Like none of the races, they're all about, for Harold Abrams, it's all about overcoming anti-Semitism in England. For Eric Liddell, it's about the pleasure that he feels, you know, his connection to God that he experiences, and that he's able to give glory to God by winning, which is just like, I love that line. And they do a wonderful job of tying each character's personal relationship to running to their own personal journey in their life. And so when you're watching the last sort of 10-second race, there's a reason why the camera like pans over the specific audience members' reactions and lingers over there little by little by little.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. Because the point of each of the races, like the whole point of Eric Liddell's stand, is that there's a higher principle or a higher priority for him than racing and winning the Olympics, and so on and so forth. So I think that's how they get away with making a movie about running. And even the opening run, when they're running around the court in Cambridge, it's about, you know, Abrams introducing himself as sort of a figure, establishing his status in the college and the camaraderie amongst the college. So I think they just do an amazing job of, and they also, you know, the heads of Cambridge, the Dons, I think they talk about how, you know, sport is the necessary thing to perfect an English gentleman's education, because sport is this avenue and pathway to perfect camaraderie and leadership and so on and so forth. And they do a great job in the film of showing that, of how the race and the running is not actually just an end in and of itself.
Yeah, well, one thing I had to like get used to or sort of like accept in this film was the sort of like aspect of like acting while running. And when I was first watching it, like when you first see Liddell, who's just for background, you mentioned just to introduce these two characters, so the main two runners that whose stories kind of run parallel in this film, even though they never end up actually competing against each other, are Eric Liddell, who is a Scottish missionary, and as you said, running for God, and then Harold Abrams, who is a Jewish Cambridge student who is running sort of because of a chip on his shoulder to prove himself in the face of anti-Semitism. And so in the first time you see a race run by Liddell at this sort of like local Scottish games, I'm not sure what the event is exactly. You know, I was noticing like all the other runners have like sort of like normal expressions, and he's just like as it seemed to me when I first saw it, like hamming it up so much. And it's like, you know, oh, he feels it so much more deeply than everybody else or something. But like that's kind of true. But like it helped for me to learn like after my first viewing that like that actually he was known for having this like really unorthodox like form and running style just as like a total amateur. Basically, he was known for like running with his head back and his mouth open. So at first when I saw it, I was like, this is just to like let us know that this is the main character of the film because he's like acting more while he's running. But I guess it's more than just that.
Eric wears like the dark coat when everyone else is wearing white. It's like, oh, it's the audience can pick him out, and like all those different things.
But like I accepted it more on my second viewing.
It's worth mentioning, in case people listening don't know, this is a true story.
Yes.
So
about the
this is an actual true story. But exactly.
Yeah. So. Yes, good point. And you know, it's kind of interesting that the you know, you were mentioning kind of like the matter of conscience in that one of the key issues in the film is that it turns out that one of the heats for the Paris Olympics is on a Sunday, and Little doesn't want to run on a Sunday, which I understand I think that's more of a Protestant thing, like not wanting to play sports on Sundays. So you just kind of, as a Catholic watching, you just kind of have to accept, like, okay, they don't play sports even like for fun on Sundays. But you know, the producer of this film, David Putnam, he worked on two films. One film we've discussed already, The Mission, and he also worked on another film by the same director, The Killing Fields. And he was specifically looking for a story in the mold of A Man for All Seasons. And he settled on about somebody who follows his conscience, and he kind of settled on this story and found a writer to write it up. And I think that like comes out particularly clearly in the scene where he's with the Prince of Wales and the other members of the Olympic Commission or whatever it's called, and they're all trying to convince him to run. And some of the lines he says are kind of like very reminiscent of some of Thomas More's lines in A Man for All Seasons, where he says, you know, God made countries and kings, and that sort of thing. So it kind of like, this film kind of like exists. It's, you know, it is a sports film, but it also exists in this other genealogy of films about Christian men of conscience, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, so we mentioned that this film is included on the Vatican film list in the category of values.
Yeah.
And I think that probably that's the most obvious reason. But this film really kind of dips its hand into a lot of different thematic concerns. Not only because it has two main characters who are both approaching racing from two different sort of angles, but also because it bookends the film in an interesting way. We begin actually in like the late 70s, where one of these racers has just died, and the older surviving classmates of his are at the funeral. And so the film is really played out as a sort of flashback, an extended flashback occasion.
There's a nostalgic kind of character to it.
Right. And
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say that its opening lines, I wish I had written them down, but the opening lines are,
"Let us praise famous men."
Yep.
Which is a quote from something, I don't remember. Shakespeare, maybe?
We should have looked it up.
I don't know. Yeah, good point.
But it's all about hearkening to our fathers and the glory of honorable men in the past on whom we, or from whom we've benefited and on whose shoulders we basically stand.
Yes.
And this theme crops up throughout as well in the form of an awareness of the war. This movie is taking place, the flashback, is taking place in 1919, 1920. So the war to end all wars and the consequences of that are still being very deeply felt. You see some wounded war veterans, but also at the university, there's a recognition that many of the students who would otherwise have been there are not. They're dead. They've died.
There's this whole new class that's been let in to fill the place of all these students who were killed in World War One.
Right.
So
So this was an aspect of the film that I was thinking about. Is, you know, for lack of a better way of putting it, this is a film about old white men remembering these like moments of glory, and not in like a sort of like, you know, navel gazing, like solipsistic, empty way.
To me, it reminded me of something that that Jordan Peterson once said about privilege, where he said, "Okay, if you have privilege, your attitude should not be how can I get rid of it. Your attitude towards it should be how can I use it to serve others."
Right.
I mean, that's probably a more Christian approach than
unless you're going to be
St.
St. Francis of Assisi or something.
Yes,
that would be the way of getting rid of your privilege.
In his particular vocation, his way of serving others was by getting rid of his privilege. But to me, it's to me. So my wife and I are expecting our first next April, our first
That's
child.
That's awesome. I didn't know that. Congratulations.
Yeah, well, I decided that the platform to make that announcement was on the Criteria podcast.
Well, dude, I'll do you one better and announce here that my wife and I are expecting in May. So,
you already said that on the last episode.
Oh, did I?
Darn. But so the reason that I mention that is when I watch a film like this, I see so many things that I want to give to my child and God willing children, because I see like, oh, they admire excellence. They're not shamed by it. They're driven on towards greatness and virtue and merit. And so to me, I think of this as like, oh, this is what a healthy, I mean, look, there was racism in it. There is classicism, sort of bad class structure in it. There's definitely some rot in the structure, but there are elements of health in that society that we should want for our own families and we should want for ourselves. Like the opening lines when they say, you know, and again, I should have looked it up too, but the opening lines of we honor great men who have gone before us. Today, let us honor great men. It's like that is, Aristotle says that virtue is what, he doesn't make this a definition, but he says the thing that society honors is virtue and the thing that society dishonors is vice. And so there should be in a healthy society pointing towards greatness and excellence and merit. And young people and throughout our whole lives, we should feel this sense of, oh, I'm capable of greatness, and because I have been given so much, I need to rise to that level of, I need to realize that potential so that I can be of service. And also, one of the most poignant moments in the opening of the film is when they got off the train and they see the faces of the World War I vets. And this is before facial surgery. This is before they had learned how to do skin grafts, which were a discovery, basically after World War I. They learned how to do skin grafts well. And so you see these men who are, their face is reconstructed with metal and sort of external to their face and so on and so forth. And it's this sort of horrifying thing. And what's amazing to me is those men are not bitter at the young men going to college, and the young men are not pitying the men from World War I. Like the soldiers say, like the reason why we sacrificed is to give young men like these men a chance, to fulfill this greatness, to preserve what is good in our society, so that human beings can flourish, so that civilization can continue. And that to me is just like, okay, I would die for that. Like that is so what a society should be about, and that is so beautiful and good. And I don't think in any way it need to be restrained by any sort of racial identity. I think that's sort of what Harold Abrahams is about, right? The approach Harold Abrahams, the Jew, the Jewish student, his approach is, I'm not going to try and defeat them by anything other than excellence. I'm going to become the fastest runner and the best student so that I earn my place at the table. Now, there were unjust, structures in his way, but to me, like the health of a society where people view the gifts that they have been given with a sense of owing a debt to the generation that went before and the generation that went after. Yeah. To me, that is anything good that is in Cambridge, anything good that is in all of those old English aristocratic structures, like that is what is worth preserving.
Yeah, that's all really well put. But one of the things that really interested me in this film is this idea of amateurism in sport and like the value that they place on that, because I wasn't really aware that up until like the late 1980s the Olympics were limited to amateurs. Any hint of professionalism was disliked.
Well, you see that that's one of the weirdest things about it for a modern viewer watching all these running segments is their technique is all over the place.
Right.
Like their arms are flailing, like everything is sort of all over the place. So that's one of the things that makes viewing it sort of a strange experience for the modern viewer is there's just no semblance of technique, and we don't realize how used we are to watching sportsmen and sportswomen just have excellent technique.
Right. But like I think there's something to be said for this. The guys at the college, the heads of the college or whatever their position is, are kind of being hard on Abrams for acting like a professional and having a professional trainer.
Yeah.
And they're kind of anti-Semitic, so we sympathize with him. But I think the movie also gives us reason to compare Abrams with Little.
Yes.
And even though they're both admirable, I think Little is the one who embodies the amateur spirit, and he is doing it for the love of it, whereas Abrams is doing it out of a chip on his shoulder. And so I think we're shown that it's more satisfying for Little, and Abrams is still not really at peace after he wins. So even though they're both praiseworthy, so
well, you see that in the scene with Abrams and his trainer afterwards, right? They win the race.
Honestly, that's the only scene that's more crushing than the scene of his loss.
Right.
Is his winning and the afterwards. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Right.
No.
So,
I was just saying, you see that Abrams can actually enjoy the thing that he's gotten because he instrumentalized it. Right. And he instrumentalized it for a good purpose, right? He instrumentalized it to break through the barriers of anti-Semitism, but he still instrumentalized it. And it's interesting, just to make a connection to the anti-Semitism or to the Semitic theme throughout this movie, is the Chariots of Fire title obviously comes from William Blake's poem Jerusalem, which is, a sort of English anthem, not their national anthem, obviously, but the poem Jerusalem is actually, William Blake was an odd guy, and he believed this theory, sort of a crazy theory, that the tribes of Israel had somehow found their way from the Middle East into England for a very short time and then gone back to the Middle East. And William Blake wrote, the poem Jerusalem. That's why there's the line in it that says, talks about, was Jerusalem here in these green and pleasant hills. And so that the title sort of ties together that theme of Abrams' Jewish identity with the English identity, and whether or not he can fully, acclimate to the English society.
Yeah. So this idea of amateurism, though, I think that even though the guys who are kind of voicing it are maybe not very likable, I think that I sympathize with their point of view, even though we're rooting for Abrams to win. Especially because after watching this, I kind of read up on the history of amateurism and the Olympics, and kind of this idea that like anybody could just go and compete in the Olympics and have a chance of winning. Any like underdog, like any military didn't have the chance of winning a war, but like anybody, regardless of their like access to like leisure time to have a trainer for years and years, like could stand a chance and compete. And there is also this class aspect of it, at least in the English university context, where like it's considered undignified for a gentleman to play sports for money. And much in the same way that in like the 16th century, a gentleman did not publish his poetry. He did not, was not a professional poet. He circulated among his friends in the court. Someone like Philip Sidney was not, his works were not published for the most part until after he died.
Well, I think because one of the other concerns of this film, it seems to me, is this question of integration. So this is a problem for both Little and for Abrams, is how is how is my pursuit of this integrated with the rest of me and the rest of my life? So in the case of Little, we have his sister expressing her concern that racing is taking up his time, taking him away from God, and is robbing him of stillness. She says, like, you don't even have time to stand still, which, for a Christian should be very troubling, because God is found there in the silence. But so too for Abrams, right? When he gets this criticism from the dons at the university, it's because this is meant to complete his education. His athletic development is meant to round out the whole package. But what he's becoming is a fanatic, a professional, devoting all of his time to this sole purpose.
And they're right. He is being an individualist. I mean, what does his coach, Musabini, say? He says, you won this for us.
Yeah.
The two of us,
which is why I don't think,
not for England.
I don't think the film frames his perspective renders it completely sympathetic. I do think we sympathize with him in the moment when he's being confronted and he stands up to the dons, but I think we also are given reason to think, there's something's afoot, something is rotten in the state of Denmark, and obviously that's just made explicit and clear when he wins finally. And the music cue is not very good. It's still kind of unsettling. And it's like, wait a second. We get this great shot of him after the race, getting his picture taken and people coming up and greeting him. But all we see is the back of his head. It's like a very striking moment where you have this sort of weird sound cue that doesn't sound celebratory or elated. He's just won. And people are coming up to him all happy and smiling and taking his picture, but we're just seeing the back of his head and him standing there almost like numb to it all. And later, like we mentioned, the scene with him and his coach in the cafe at 3:00 in the morning drinking, it's so starkly lit. You get this like hard overhead lighting and these deep shadows cast across his face so that you can't even see his eyes.
It looks like an off-Broadway scene.
Yeah. Well, it's like very striking that we're not given the sense that he's in a good way even after he's won.
Right.
So although we can sort of get behind him and what he's doing in sort of, committing to excellence and resisting prejudice, but he's still wounded, and I think that if this film were made today, we would lose all of that nuance, right? It would be like break through that glass ceiling and like you're going to accomplish like these goals and set these records and then you're going to be happy and at peace.
One thing we can say for him is, though, he doesn't play for money, he's which was like the ultimate like shameful thing, in the Olympics. I mean, Jim Thorpe, who's like a really famous American athlete, had in 1912 had all of his gold medals stripped from him because they found out that he had very briefly accepted small sums of money for playing semi-professional baseball in his summers during college. And I think 30 years after he died, they reinstated his gold medals. But like basically there was this huge taboo against professionalism. Although I read that the reason Musabini was an outsider is not so much because of being a professional trainer, but because of something connected with doping in his past. But it was normal for professional sportsmen to dope anyway, not for amateurs. So like basically up through like until like the 70s and 80s, this taboo starts to be broken down, and the rules are changed, I think, in the late 80s. One of the reasons is because it was very strongly suspected that the Eastern Bloc countries were already essentially sending professional athletes because they were paid full time by the governments and all that. But the other thing was just that television became a big thing and it became commercial. And
well, that's one of the things you realize when you watch the movie is how deeply the Olympics have changed.
Yeah.
From a point of national pride and sort of a healthy patriotism to like an NBC special.
Right.
Like it's so shifted. And to the point where like, you know, you focus on amazing athletes like Michael Phelps and Simone Biles, but you don't focus as much on like the US team or the New Zealand team or the French team.
That's right. So I think that I don't know, I've never been a real devotee of the Olympics, to be honest, but I have to say I think that the earlier ideal is far more appealing than what we have now, where it's just totally
I've never been a huge sports person either, and that's one of the reasons that I like this film, is that it's not really about the sports, it's about all of the underlying societal structures underneath and the morality underneath. But growing up and to this day, I can't ever really get behind like being super invested in football or other sort of modern sports, because it's like, okay, so the person playing for the Baltimore Ravens is actually from Houston, Texas, and he's lived, and it's sort of like, okay, so I mean, they're great, and I know that like 90% of people are like gonna get annoyed at me for this, but I've never really understood it, because it's like, but it's not the Maryland team, it's not the Houston team, and one of the things that I loved when I was in college was the fact that when you're playing intramurals, right? When you're playing intramural sports of like the soccer team or the rugby team or whatever, is that the people were actually part of the college. They were part of the community. Yeah. And so there was just a sense of sport that, as you know, James, you said the word integration, and I think that's that's a great word to sort of have in mind whenever you're thinking or talking about this movie, is like intramural sports, for me at least, were the closest that I've ever experienced like an amateur spirit of sport being in rhythm with community, with education, and with friendship.
And that's partially why there's still a controversy over paying college athletes and incentivizing them to come to a certain college and things like that.
But aren't college sports now just seen as like an on-ramp to the professional leagues?
Yeah, I guess so. The only sports that I ever get excited about is the World Cup. For me, it's because some of that drama is still intact, because it's countries going head to head against each other, you know, and for the most part, the players.
Also, soccer is just more fun to watch than most other sports.
That's true. But I want to just go through really quickly a list of all of the things that this movie made me nostalgic for, because this film takes place in 1920, and here we are in 2021, and as you're watching it, it just feels like
the clothes are much better.
It just feels like I am watching an advanced people, like a far advanced, progressive, like developed and civilized people. Like, I think on almost every count, we have regressed. And look,
I turned to my wife and said, like, wouldn't society be better if like people dressed this way? If like, if there
even
was
the
actually
working
some
class
sense
people
of
dressed much better, you know?
Oh yeah, are you kidding me?
Look, you know, you watch this movie and there's a noticeable absence of, you know, technology and gadgets and stuff. But on every other count, it just seems like, whoa, this is like an alien species far advanced beyond our wildest imaginings.
Okay,
so
go for it.
Okay, patriotism, just general culture, leisure, like knowing how to spend, having time for leisure.
Gilbert and Sullivan.
Huh?
Gilbert and Sullivan for sure.
The university.
I mean, it's just so fantastic that like the ideal of the education of that period was that you would learn law, go on to be a lawyer, but also be like a musical performer, right?
Yes.
There was this, and that to me is like, just to interrupt your list a little bit more, I love the fact that there are societies in England about literally everything.
Yes,
right.
Oh
you
my
have
gosh.
the Footlight Society.
One of the most exciting parts of the film for me was when the new freshman class has first arrived, and
I love that.
They're going around to like all the clubs, basically all the societies, and signing up. It's like a huge portion of it is a single shot where you're moving through this
great
crowd.
Camera work.
It's awesome camera work, and just like the public singing.
You know what? I had like such a repulsed. Like the first time I saw that scene, I was just like, I wanted to murder all of those people. I just like, but then like as you accept it, you just have to accept like this is not ironic. This is what they did at the time. This isn't like, because the first time I saw it, it was like my reaction to it as though somebody in 2021 were dressing like that and doing that as like a affectation.
But this is a part of
you have to accept. You just have to accept that they're not being like pretentious.
But listen, this is a part of every culture in human history except for our own. Right? I think that it's Giussani who said that. Oh man, it's one of these like weird communion and liberation quotes. You know, like you with Opus Dei. I'm like communion and liberation adjacent. What is it? It's like a people who sings is a people that is aware of itself. So like it's like an expression of community and it's expression of belonging. That they're together around the piano singing a Gilbert and Sullivan tune.
Yeah,
you know,
I love that Gilbert and Sullivan, which I love Gilbert and Sullivan. I love that that's like the other soundtrack for this movie, other than the techno. You know?
Yeah. Well, okay. So singing, respect for the Sabbath, male intimacy and friendship, good dress. We already hit. Good vocabulary, good manners. Like all of these things just struck me as like, why do we not have these things, right? You watch a period movie and a lot of times you're struck by like say something like Gladiator, like, oh wow, you know, they did a really good job of recreating this like you know, ancient history. Wow, you know, it would suck not to have air conditioning. But you watch a movie like this and it's just 100 years ago. This is not a long time. And it's like, whoa, how have we regressed so far? You know,
but a lot of this is due to just the modern rebellion against any form of authority, and people don't experience the willingness to take on a personal obedience to an authority as like a joyful, pleasurable thing. But the fact is like once you take on obedience as a voluntary duty, you gain admission to a community that you cannot enter into except through obedience.
Well, and that's the whole point of authority, is establishing the community, you know?
Right.
Yeah, and I mean there's a double edge to standards. On one hand, standards are what provide everything that you are nostalgic for, and then on the other hand, people will feel slighted by standards, especially today. Is like people feel extremely resentful and slighted towards any form of standard as like a form of oppression, and it's a sad thing. It's a really sad thing.
Sorry, even aside from those things, like a lot of the things you mention are like have changed simply as a direct result of technology.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like the fact that people don't sing together for entertainment is because of recorded music. You know, and the fact that you know, the clothes are different is probably partially a result of
mass production.
Yeah. Although I guess that was already happening to some extent with clothes at that time. You know, and a number of the things that you could mention are also a direct result of technological. And the changes in the Olympics are partially a result of them being broadcast on television. You know, you know, it would take a very high level of virtue to sort of like resist the natural like tendencies of some of these technologies.
Well, yeah. So, you know, this is all partly why I'm glad that this film is sort of situated the way that it is in this sort of hermeneutic of looking back on a life and on our forefathers. Because for me, you know, that's where like the real gold is in this film. Obviously, you know, you could talk all day about its sort of primary concern of you know, doing things for God's glory, excellence, you know, overcoming obstacles, all of that. But you scratch the surface a bit more and you get more into these sort of social aspects to the film. That's for me where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
So as I've been producing A Christmas Carol, we've also been developing a script for a sort of adventure series set in 1880, and those two things have really immersed me in the Victorian era. So, this film is set in what is it, 1924, right?
Yeah.
So this is post-Victorian era, obviously, but it's still, especially in England, coming out of the Victorian era. And so doing, the Christmas Carol and then this other series has given me sort of this deep appreciation for, first of all, how similar our own time period is to a lot of what was happening in the Victorian era, especially in the US, but then how much we've lost in terms of sort of general social intelligence and general social behavior since the Victorian era. I've become a huge fan. The more I've learned of it, the more I've become a fan of the Victorian era.
Interesting. There were a couple things in the film that didn't quite work for me, or were a little bit a little bit grating. Like I think the use of flashback voiceovers was a little bit too much. It's like you don't need to play the whole dialogue for me, because I just saw it. I just heard this dialogue an hour ago. I can remember when he's remembering this entire dialogue. They could have even just taken one snippet from that dialogue, and that would have been enough to recall the thing to your memory. You didn't have to it wasn't necessary to have the flashback to "Don't fret yourself." Right. I do fret myself. That's not really essential thematic dialogue, So that was a little bit too, I don't know, too obvious, just not respecting my intelligence as a viewer. But the only other thing that made me laugh in the movie was the American team. In particularly the scene where they're all training, and they all have such a more aggressive mode of warming up than everybody else. And then that cue is the corniest cue in the movie, probably.
But also, it was the beginning of a decade of great montages that happened in film, right? So all the sports movies from the 80s, have the sort of the 45-second nothing, no plot happening, just guys working out and whatever the hottest music was.
Right. But the music is this weird, the British, almost like an alien, such a stereotyped idea of what an American vibe sounds like, even though it's 1924. It's these Hendrix chords, this funk kind of sound, horn sound, and then you've got these Americans with the British actors with fairly bad American actors just saying what's the coach yelling at? He's you've got dirt in your brains or something like that. Just these stereotypically American sounding things. Yeah. That's pretty funny. And it was also just funny hearing the one runner talk to the Prince of Wales, where he's clearly says "sir" in a British accent to him. Even just by looking at him, you can tell this is not American.
Sure.
This is
it was
British.
The whole film was shot on location in England and Wales. Right. I think.
So it just made me laugh to hear some of those stereotypical American accents.
It's also hilarious to see what they thought warming up for an event. The intense workout. It was just them doing a simple stretch, but with a grimace on their face.
Yeah. I gotta
and then
say,
in one of the background scenes, you see. I don't know if this is just highlighting the amateur nature of these sportsmen, but there's this guy tossing a ball back and forth in front of his face. And he's not doing anything. I know exactly it's just
what you're talking about.
This intense montage, and he's just tossing a ball back and forth.
That's awesome.
It's what were you doing, man? Right. Did the director just throw a ball at you and say be serious, do this thing? It's just,
I gotta say,
you realize how it's one of the things I was thinking of is how would this film be done if it were done today? And I think the storylines would have been tightened up a lot. I sort of think that they would probably collapse it into either the Little or the Abrams storyline. I don't think they would have held both at the same time. I think for a modern audience, those would be two separate movies. But then the main thing was just oh man, the sport montage and the the sort of view around sports would be so different.
Yeah, I did get a kick out of seeing the American villains, portrayed the big bad American team coming into town. Made me feel patriotic.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Well, fellas, I think that that about does it for our discussion of Chariots of Fire. I got through my list of everything. Was there anything else that either of you wanted to hit on before we wrapped it up?
Only other thing is, if you haven't seen the, I forget what year it was, but the English Olympics performance of the Chariots of Fire theme with Vangelis, or how did you pronounce his name?
I don't know.
Vangelis,
I don't
but
know. I don't know how it's
well,
pronounced.
I don't know either, but I'm sure we'll both butcher it
Greek.
together. But there's an Olympic ceremony that England did with Rowan Atkinson performing the keyboard part of Vangelis's Chariots of Fire theme, and it is, if you watch it after the film, you'll just cry laughing. It's so funny. It's so good.
Nice. I did want to say something about Eric Liddell. You know, it mentions that he died in China in the what are the words? What's the term for
occupied China?
Yeah, but what's the term for the text
epilogue
at the end of one of
these
these
films?
films?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know.
Anyway, I was gonna say epitaph, but not quite right. But so yeah, he dies he actually died in a camp in China, like an internment camp in 1945. I guess the whole camp was like really bummed out that he died, because he was like such a great guy. He was like getting people to be nice to each other and like, you know, make good use of their time and stuff. And it said that his last words were something like "it's complete surrender," like referring to, he was discussing a book he had written with somebody he had written on surrender to God, and yeah. So I thought that was cool.
Wow.
And he does seem to have actually been like a kind of like real life like Protestant saint. This guy, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us to discuss Chariots of Fire. We enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great talking with you.
Yeah,
guys.
I'll have to have you on my other podcast sometime for like a full interview about what you're doing sometime down the road.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Maybe when either A Christmas Carol we have more of the episodes completed, or when the next project is rolling around.
Yeah, that'd be great. Are you playing a role in A Christmas Carol, by the way?
No, one of the things that I wanted to do, I felt strongly about this, was I didn't want this to be me producing something that I performed in. I wanted it to be a little bit more legit than that, a little bit more, not that it's not legit, but I wanted to create something that was not just Peter's pet project, but an actual beginning of an entertainment company. And so no, I have a few select roles in the background of the part, and I do read like an intro at the beginning of each episode. So there's like a little on-ramp for the listeners into the Victorian world, but I'm not performing any of the parts in the production.
Gotcha. Well, that's cool. All right, so again, yeah, people can go to Relevant Radio, the app, to find Peter's stuff, the Merry Beggars production of A Christmas Carol, and whatever they do in the future. Congrats again on that. And do you want to? Well, no.
Yeah,
no
by the time this
fundraiser.
episode comes out, our fall fundraising campaign will have completed. Hopefully, we will have made our goal.
Yeah.
If we haven't, then maybe there will still be an opportunity when this comes out to donate. Who knows? But
there
in
will
any
be an
case,
opportunity to donate.
Yeah, in any
even if
case,
not part of the campaign.
you can head over to catholicculture.org/donate/audio, and you'll know your donation is supporting not just all of the work of Catholic culture, but in particular our podcast work.
Yes, and our next episode will be our Christmas episode for this year. And we'll be having Matthew Schmitz, from writer, pretty well-known writer for First Things and other publications, on to discuss the Eric Romer film My Night at Maud's. And he's written a number of essays on Romer, who was a French Catholic director. So we'll be excited to dive into his work finally.
Definitely.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.